What if everything you've been told about power, leadership, and destiny is wrong? What if the greatest underdog story ever recorded, one that reshaped empires, toppled tyrants, and forged an unbreakable civilization, has been hidden in plain sight? This is not fiction. This is not legend. This is the explosive, untold truth of how a single man, armed with nothing but divine truth and unshakable conviction, sparked a revolution that would burn across continents, and how his successors faced betrayals, assassinations, and civil wars that would make Game of Thrones look tame. Imagine a world where the mighty Persian and Roman empires, unstoppable superpowers for centuries, were brought to their knees by a band of desert warriors who refused to surrender. Picture a leader so just, he wandered the streets at night in disguise to personally feed the poor. Envision a general so brilliant, he conquered nations without destroying their cultures. This is the story of Islam's rise, not as dry history, but as a gripping saga of ambition, faith, and raw human drama. But here's what they don't teach you. The Prophet's death nearly shattered everything. His closest companions, heroes, who had bled beside him, faced an impossible choice: preserve unity at all costs, or let the revolution die with its founder. What followed was a masterclass in leadership, betrayal, and survival that still shapes our world today. You'll witness the shocking assassination plot against the Prophet's successor, and the cover-up that followed the forbidden battlefield tactic. Khalid ibn al-Walid used to annihilate armies 10 times his size. The real reason Rome's greatest emperor trembled at the sight of a ragged Muslim envoy the night Umar ibn al-Khattab made a decision so radical, it bankrupted empires, but saved millions. The buried letter that sparked Islam's first civil war, and who really wrote it? This is history stripped bare, no sugarcoating, no fairy tales. Just raw, unfiltered accounts of how ordinary men became legends, how empires rose and fell on the edge of a sword, and how an idea changed the world forever. But be warned, once you see the truth, you'll never look at power, faith, or leadership the same way again. The question is, do you dare witness the revolution? Press play. The desert sands are waiting. The scorching sun beat down on the desert sands as a lone traveler made his way toward Mecca. His heart pounded with a mix of determination and dread. He was no ordinary man. This was the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, leading 1,400 of his followers on a journey that would change history. But this was no ordinary pilgrimage. They were unarmed, draped in the simple garments of pilgrims, their hearts filled with faith yet braced for the unknown. The dream had been clear. The Prophet would enter the sacred house of God, his head shaved, the keys of Mecca in his hand. The companions believed this was the sign victory was near. But between them and Mecca stood an enemy thirsting for revenge. An enemy who had sworn to spill their blood. The Quraysh, the powerful tribe that ruled Mecca, had not forgotten their humiliation at Badr. Their hatred burned hotter than the desert sun. They had lost fathers, sons, and leaders to the Muslims. And now, the very man they sought to destroy was marching toward their city, not with an army, but as a pilgrim. The audacity of it enraged them. Does Muhammad think we will simply let him walk into our home? They spat. After all the blood between us? Their warriors sharpened their swords, their women wailed in grief, and their leaders swore oaths written in their own blood that no Muslim would set foot in Mecca alive. Meanwhile, the Prophet and his companions pressed forward, their faith unwavering. But whispers of doubt slithered through the ranks. Some tribes, fearing the wrath of Quraysh, turned back. "We cannot face them without weapons," they muttered. Yet the Prophet's resolve was unshaken. He had seen the vision, and he knew this was the path laid before them. As they approached the sacred boundary, he ordered the sacrificial camels to be marked, their sides slit in the ancient tradition of pilgrimage. The blood was a declaration: we come in peace. But would Quraysh see it that way? The desert wind carried the tension as scouts raced back and forth between the two camps. The Quraysh's spies reported every movement, their commanders debating whether to strike. "Let us crush them now." One snarled, but others hesitated. "They come as pilgrims. If we slaughter them at the sanctuary, the tribes will never forgive us." The debate raged until a hardened warrior, Urwa ibn Madad, stepped forward. "Let me go to Muhammad. Let me see his strength for myself." What Urwa witnessed would shake him to his core. The Muslims were not an army, they were a brotherhood. When the Prophet performed ablutions, his companions fought for the droplets of water that fell from his hands. When a single hair fell from his head, they scrambled to keep it as a blessing. Their love for him was absolute, their loyalty unbreakable. Urwa returned to Quraysh pale-faced. "I have stood before kings," he admitted, "but never have I seen a man so revered by his people. If you fight them, you will never know peace." But Quraysh's pride was a fortress. They sent another envoy, a cunning negotiator named Suhail ibn Amr, with a message laced with venom: "Turn back or die." The Prophet listened calmly, then spoke words that would echo through time. "We did not come to fight. We came to honor thee." House of God, the tension thickened. The companions clenched their fists, their hearts torn between obedience and fury. Then came the demand that would test them all. Any Muslim who flees to you from Mecca must be returned. Any who flee from you to us, we keep. The companions erupted. "How can we abandon our brothers?" Umar ibn al-Khattab, his face flushed with rage, confronted the Prophet. "Are we not on the truth? Are they not on falsehood? Why must we yield?" The Prophet's reply was gentle but firm. "I am the servant of Allah, and I do not disobey His command." The treaty was signed, its terms bitter as poison. But as the ink dried, a cry pierced the air. A young man, Abu Jandal, stumbled into camp, his chains clanking, his body bruised. "Save me," he begged. Suhail, his own father, snarled, "He is mine by your own agreement." The companions watched in horror as Abu Jandal was dragged away, his screams haunting the desert, their hearts shattered. This was not the victory they had dreamed of. This was surrender. But the Prophet's voice cut through the despair. "Be patient, Abu Jandal. Allah will grant you relief." The words were a lifeline, a promise hidden in the storm. For beneath the surface of defeat, something greater was unfolding, a plan not even the Quraysh could foresee. The ink on the treaty had barely dried when the first test came. Abu Jandal, his wrists raw from chains, was dragged back to Mecca by his own father, Suhail ibn Amr. The Muslims stood frozen, their hearts pounding with helpless rage. Every instinct screamed at them to intervene, to draw their swords and fight, but the Prophet's command held them like iron. Patience. The word tasted bitter. How could this be Allah's plan? As Abu Jandal disappeared into the distance, his cries fading into the desert wind, the Prophet turned to his companions. "Prepare to depart," he said. "Shave your heads and sacrifice your animals." The order hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, no one moved. Their faces were storm clouds, their hands trembling, not from fear, but from the fire of injustice burning in their chests. They had marched here expecting victory, expecting to walk into Mecca as conquerors. Instead, they were leaving humiliated, forced to abandon their own. Then with a slow breath, the Prophet himself took the blade and shaved his head. The act was a signal. One by one, the companions followed, their shears biting through hair like a surrender. But this was no surrender, it was discipline, faith, trust in something greater than their own understanding. The camels were slaughtered, their blood soaking into the sand of Hudaybiyyah, a silent testament to obedience in the face of agony. Yet even as the Muslims grieved, the Quraysh watched with uneasy triumph. They had won, or so they thought. Their warriors jeered from a distance, mocking the Muslims' retreat. "Run back to Medina, cowards," they shouted. But among them, a few voices whispered doubt. What if we were wrong? What if this treaty is not our victory, but our doom? Back in the Muslim camp, the Prophet gathered his companions beneath a gnarled acacia tree. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Umar ibn al-Khattab, still seething, finally broke the silence. Messenger of Allah, why did we agree to this? The Prophet's eyes held a depth of knowing. Allah has promised us victory, he said, but not in the way we expected. Then came the revelation, a surah from the heavens, its words crashing over them like a wave. Indeed, we have given you a clear victory. The companions stared at one another. Victory? This felt like anything but. Yet the verses continued, unraveling the truth. The treaty was not a defeat, but a masterstroke. By stopping the bloodshed, Islam would spread in ways the sword could never achieve. The Quraysh's own arrogance would undo them. And as for Abu Jandal and those like him, their suffering was not in vain. Every chain, every tear was a seed. And seeds grow in darkness before they break into the light. But the Quraysh, drunk on their perceived triumph, had no idea what was coming. They returned to Mecca celebrating, their chief slapping Suhail on the back. You humiliated Muhammad, they crowed. Yet within weeks, the cracks began to show. Tribes who had once feared Quraysh now watched with new eyes. Why would a man like Muhammad yield unless he was certain of something greater? Whispers of Islam spread like wildfire through the markets, the caravans, the quiet corners of the city. Even some of Quraysh's own youth, long stifled under their elders' tyranny, secretly wondered, what if we've been on the wrong side? Meanwhile, in Medina, the Muslims nursed their wounds, but the Prophet's confidence never wavered. He knew what the Quraysh did not. Treaties can be broken, but truth cannot. And the truth was spreading faster than ever. Then, like a thunderclap, news arrived. A village north of Medina, a fortress of Jewish tribes hostile to Islam, had been conspiring with Quraysh. Their names sent a chill through the believers. Khaybar. The Prophet's gaze turned northward. The real battle was about to begin. The sands of time had shifted. The Treaty of Hudaybiyyah, which had seemed like surrender, was now revealing its hidden design. Every clause, every concession, was a thread in a divine tapestry, one that the Quraysh, in their arrogance, could not see. But the Prophet saw. And soon, the world would witness the truth. Just months after the treaty, the first crack in Quraysh's power appeared. A young Meccan named Abu Basir, who had embraced Islam, escaped his captors and fled to Medina. Under the terms of the treaty, the Muslims were bound to return him. The Prophet's face was heavy as he delivered the verdict. We have given our word, we must honor it. Abu Basir's eyes burned with desperation as he was handed back to the Quraysh's envoys. But on the road to Mecca, as the caravan passed through a narrow ravine, Abu Basir seized his moment. With a smuggled blade, he struck down his captor and vanished into the wilderness. Word of his escape spread like wildfire. Soon, others followed. Abu Jandal, the chained prisoner of Hudaybiyyah, broke free and joined Abu Basir in the desert. Together, they formed a band of outcasts, striking at Quraysh's caravans with guerrilla precision. The Quraysh, bound by their own treaty, could not retaliate against Medina. Their merchants wailed as their goods were plundered. Their leaders, who had once gloated over the treaty's terms, now writhed in its trap. In desperation, they sent a message to the Prophet. Take these men. The treaty is a burden to us now. The Prophet smiled. The very agreement meant to weaken Islam had become its shield. Abu Basir and his men were welcomed into the Muslim fold, their defiance a beacon for others. The Quraysh's grip on Mecca was slipping, and they knew it. Meanwhile, the Prophet turned his attention north, to the looming stronghold of Khaybar. Its towering fortresses housed the Banu Nadir, a Jewish tribe exiled from Medina for their treachery. For years, they had plotted with the Quraysh, funding wars and poisoning minds against Islam. Now, with the treaty neutralizing Mecca, the time had come to sever this last dagger at Islam's back. The Muslim army marched under banners of resolve. But Khaybr was no ordinary target. Its walls were legend, its warriors hardened. As the Muslims camped before its gates, an eerie silence hung over the land. Then, in the dead of night, a figure emerged from the shadows, a Bedouin, his face gaunt with hunger. "The people of Khaybr are starving," he whispered. "Their stores are empty. Their morale is broken." The prophet listened, then raised his hands in prayer. Allah humbles the mighty with the smallest of things. At dawn, the attack began. The Muslims advanced under a hail of arrows, their shields locked like the scales of a dragon. But Khaybr's gates held firm. Days turned into weeks. Then, on a morning veiled in mist, Ali ibn Abi Talib stepped forward. Plagued by fever, his eyes blazed with a light not of this world. "Give me the banner," he said. The prophet draped it over his shoulders. "Fight in the name of Allah, but do not turn back until he grants you victory." What happened next would be sung of for centuries. Ali charged the fortress gate, a slab of iron so heavy it took 10 men to move. With a single strike, he shattered its hinges. The defenders gaped as the Lion of Allah tore through their ranks, his sword a blur of divine wrath. By sunset, Khaybr's strongest citadel had fallen. The rest would soon follow as the Muslims divided the spoils. A curious detail emerged. Among the treasures was a cache of books, Torah scrolls, hidden by the Banu Nadir's rabbis. The prophet ordered them returned. "The people of the book are under our protection," he declared. Even in victory, mercy prevailed, but far to the south, the Quraysh seethed. Khaybr's fall was a death knell to their hopes. The balance of power had shifted, and they were on the wrong side of history. The treaty they had designed to strangle Islam had instead given it breath. And now, the wind was at the Muslims' backs. The fall of Khaybr sent shockwaves across Arabia. Tribes that had once mocked the Muslims now watched in stunned silence as the balance of power tilted irrevocably. The Quraysh, who had banked on Khaybr's might to crush Islam, found their hopes buried in the dust of its fallen fortresses. But the prophet knew this was only the beginning. The Treaty of Hudaybiyyah had bought time and time in the hands of destiny, was a weapon sharper than any sword. As the Muslims returned to Medina, laden with spoils, an unexpected delegation arrived. The leaders of Khaybr, their pride broken but their curiosity piqued, came to question the prophet. "How did you defeat us?" their chief asked, his voice edged with grudging respect. The prophet's reply was simple. "Allah gives victory to those who stand for truth." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. That night, in the shadows of Medina's palm groves, the first rabbis of Khaybr embraced Islam. But not all enemies had been vanquished. In the alleys of Mecca, the Quraysh's fury festered. Their caravans plundered, their allies defeated. They clung to one last hope, the Banu Bakr, a tribe bound to them by blood and vengeance. Under the cover of night, Quraysh's leaders whispered to their kin, "Attack the Quza." The Quza, Muslim allies protected by the treaty, were vulnerable. The Quraysh knew this was a gamble, but desperation breeds recklessness. When news of the massacre reached Medina, the companions erupted. The treaty had been violated. Umar ibn al-Khattab, his fists clenched, turned to the prophet. "Now we strike?" The prophet's silence was answer enough. For 2 years, the Muslims had held their patience. Now the hour of reckoning had, but the Quraysh, drunk on their perceived triumph, had no idea what was coming. They returned to Mecca celebrating, their chief slapping Suhail on the back. "You humiliated Muhammad," they crowed. Yet within weeks, the cracks began to show. Tribes who had once feared Quraysh now watched with new eyes. Why would a man like Muhammad yield unless he was certain of something greater? Whispers of Islam spread like wildfire through the markets, the caravans, the quiet corners of the city. Even some of Quraysh's own youth, long stifled under their elders' tyranny, secretly wondered, what if we've been on the wrong side? Meanwhile, in Medina, the Muslims nursed their wounds, but the Prophet's confidence never wavered. He knew what the Quraysh did not. Treaties can be broken, but truth cannot. And the truth was spreading faster than ever. Then, like a thunderclap, news arrived. A village north of Medina, a fortress of Jewish tribes hostile to Islam, had been conspiring with Quraysh. Their name sent a chill through the believers. Khaybar. The Prophet's gaze turned northward. The real battle was about to begin. The sands of time had shifted. The Treaty of Hudaybiyyah, which had seemed like surrender, was now revealing its hidden design. Every clause, every concession, was a thread in a divine tapestry, one that the Quraysh, in their arrogance, could not see. But the Prophet saw. And soon, the world would witness the truth. Just months after the treaty, the first crack in Quraysh's power appeared. A young Meccan named Abu Basir, who had embraced Islam, escaped his captors and fled to Medina. Under the terms of the treaty, the Muslims were bound to return him. The Prophet's face was heavy as he delivered the verdict. We have given our word. We must honor it. Abu Basir's eyes burned with desperation as he was handed back to the Quraysh's envoys. But on the road to Mecca, as the caravan passed through a narrow ravine, Abu Basir seized his moment. With a smuggled blade, he struck down his captor and vanished into the wilderness. Word of his escape spread like wildfire. Soon, others followed. Abu Jandal, the chained prisoner of Hudaybiyyah, broke free and joined Abu Basir in the desert. Together, they formed a band of outcasts, striking at Quraysh's caravans with guerrilla precision. The Quraysh, bound by their own treaty, could not retaliate against Medina. Their merchants wailed as their goods were plundered. Their leaders, who had once gloated over the treaty's terms, now writhed in its trap. In desperation, they sent a message to the Prophet. Take these men. The treaty is a burden to us now. The Prophet smiled. The very agreement meant to weaken Islam had become its shield. Abu Basir and his men were welcomed into the Muslim fold, their defiance a beacon for others. The Quraysh's grip on Mecca was slipping, and they knew it. Meanwhile, the Prophet turned his attention north, to the looming stronghold of Khaybar. Its towering fortresses housed the Banu Nadir, a Jewish tribe exiled from Medina for their treachery. For years they had plotted with the Quraysh, funding wars and poisoning minds against Islam. Now, with the treaty neutralizing Mecca, the time had come to sever this last dagger at Islam's back. The Muslim army marched out of Mecca, their numbers swelled by new converts from the Quraysh. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. The Meccan nobles, fresh from their surrender, eyed the veteran Muslims with suspicion. Would these former enemies fight alongside them? Would they hold the line when the arrows flew? The two armies met at the Valley of Hunain, a narrow pass where the cliffs seemed to lean in like silent spectators. As dawn broke, Malik unleashed his plan. Thousands of Hawazin warriors hidden in the mountain passes rained down arrows like a hailstorm. The Muslim vanguard, led by Khalid ibn al-Walid, found themselves trapped in a killing zone. For the first time in years, the Muslim ranks wavered. Chaos erupted. New recruits from Mecca turned and fled, their screams echoing off the canyon walls. Even seasoned companions stumbled in the panic. In the eye of the storm, the Prophet stood firm. Where are you going? He called out to the retreating men. His voice carried the weight of divine authority. I am the Prophet of God. Come back. Then came the miracle no one expected. The Prophet scooped a handful of dust and cast it toward the enemy. At that moment, a desert wind howled through the valley, carrying the sand into the eyes of the Hawazin. Warriors, blinded and confused, their formation shattered. The tide turned in an instant. Ali ibn Abi Talib and the Muslim cavalry charged like a thunderbolt, cutting through the Hawazin lines. The enemy's carefully laid plans collapsed into pandemonium. Malik ibn Auf watched in horror as his grand strategy disintegrated. His warriors broke ranks, his camp fell, and finally his own men turned on him. By midday, the Battle of Hunain was over. The Muslims stood victorious amidst a sea of captured spoils, 6,000 prisoners, 24,000 camels, and enough weapons to arm an empire. But the true test came after the battle. The victorious Muslims eyed the vast wealth greedily, especially the Meccan newcomers who expected reward for their late conversion. The Prophet, however, had a different lesson to teach. He gathered the spoils and distributed them, not to his loyal companions, but to the very men who had fled at Hunain. The veterans stood shocked. Why give to those who deserted us? Umar demanded that. The Prophet's reply changed everything. I bind their hearts to Islam. In that moment, the Meccan nobles' men who had fought against Islam for decades felt something break inside them. The generosity of their former enemy was a weapon they couldn't defend against. One by one, they approached the Prophet, not for gold, but for guidance. The Hawazins' defeat had been military, but this was the conquest of hearts. Yet Malik ibn Auf still roamed free in the mountains, a wounded lion nursing his pride. When he finally surrendered, expecting execution, the Prophet did the unthinkable. He pardoned him and returned his family. Malik, the architect of Hunain, fell to his knees and embraced Islam on the spot. No man has ever been defeated like this, he whispered. As the Muslims returned to Mecca, laden with prisoners and plunder, a new chapter began. The tribes of Arabia watched in awe as their old world crumbled. The question wasn't who would resist Islam anymore, but who would be wise enough to embrace it first. But in the shadows, old hatred still festered. The Romans, watching from their northern borders, saw the rising power and clenched their fists. The final test of the Prophet's mission was yet to come. The sands of Arabia had shifted forever. With Mecca subdued and the Hawazin humbled, the tribes now flocked to Medina, not with swords drawn, but with hands outstretched. Delegations arrived daily, their leaders stammering pledges of allegiance, their eyes darting nervously at the growing power of the Muslim state. The Prophet received them all with the same measured grace, his wisdom turning former warlords into devoted followers. But one man watched these developments with particular unease. Heraclius, Emperor of Rome, sat in his palace at Constantinople studying reports from the southern frontier. A new power was rising in the desert, one that threatened the ancient order. His advisors scoffed, "They are but desert bandits." Yet, Heraclius had heard the stories of battles won against impossible odds, of cities conquered without slaughter, of enemies transformed into allies. He knew bandits didn't behave this way. The Prophet, aware of the gathering storm, made a decision that stunned his companions. "We march north," he declared, "to Tabuk." The name sent a chill through the ranks. Tabuk lay on the very edge of Ramang territory, a journey of 700 kilometers through blistering heat with no water sources. And it was harvest season, when every man was needed in the fields. The hypocrites in Medina seized their chance. "Muhammad wants to get you killed in Roman lands," they whispered. Some Muslims, their faith weak, began making excuses. The Prophet listened to their lies, the sick who weren't sick, the busy who weren't busy, and simply said, "Allah knows the truth." But the true believers responded with breathtaking sacrifice. Uthman ibn Affan funded the entire army with 1,000 dinars and 10,000 dinars more. Abu Bakr gave everything he owned, leaving his family nothing but Allah and his messenger. And then there were the 7 sufferers, poor companions who had nothing to give but their burning desire to fight. When they came weeping to the Prophet, unable to contribute, he comforted them. "Your intention is worth more than gold. The march to Tabuk became the ultimate test of faith. The sun scorched their backs as they crossed valleys of blistering stone. Thirst drove men to lick dew from rocks. Hunger gnawed at their bellies until they ate leaves. Yet the prophet pressed onward, his determination unshaken. When some complained, he simply said, "Paradise lies in the shade of swords." Finally, they reached Tabuk and found no Roman army. The imperial forces, hearing of the Muslims' approach, had withdrawn to their fortresses. The prophet could have declared victory and turned back. Instead, he did something far more strategic. He stayed. For 20 days, the Muslim army camped in Roman territory, sending a clear message to every tribe in the region. The balance of power had changed. Local Christian and Jewish leaders came to negotiate, and the prophet offered them treaties unlike any they'd known, protection in exchange for a modest tax, with full rights to practice their faith. These weren't the terms of a conqueror, but of a statesman building something entirely new. As the Muslims returned to Medina, the hypocrites prepared their final mockery. They built a mosque of dissent to rival the prophet's mosque. When invited to inaugurate it, the prophet received a divine revelation exposing its true purpose, a den of conspiracy. "Burn it," he ordered. The flames that consumed that mosque marked the end of hypocrisy's power in Medina. But the greatest shock came upon their return. The 7 sufferers, those who had wept for being too poor to contribute, were singled out for divine praise in the Quran. Nor is there blame upon those who, when they came to you that you might give them mounts, you said, "I can find nothing for you to ride upon." They turned back while their eyes overflowed with tears out of grief that they could not find something to spend. In that moment, everyone understood the real victory at Tabuk hadn't been over Rome, but over weakness, hypocrisy, and doubt. The Muslims had crossed more than desert. They'd crossed into a new era of confidence. Yet as the autumn winds blew, messengers arrived with ominous news from Yemen. A false prophet named Al-Asad had risen, claiming divine revelation. And in the east, the Persian Empire was stirring. The tests were coming faster now, because when light grows brighter, the shadows fight hardest. The winds of change howled across Arabia as Islam's influence spread like wildfire. But with every tribe that embraced the truth, new enemies emerged from the shadows. In Yemen, a storm was brewing. A self-proclaimed prophet named Al-Asad the liar had risen, commanding armies and twisting minds with his sorcery. His message was a poison to the fledgling Muslim communities, and his reach grew by the day. The prophet knew time was of the essence. He turned to his most trusted companions, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, and others, dispatching them as emissaries to Yemen. Their mission was delicate: spread Islam's light while confronting Al-Asad's darkness without sparking civil war. The companions rode south with Quranic verses on their tongues and swords at their sides, prepared for any outcome. Meanwhile, in Medina, the final pillars of Islam were being revealed. The night journey and ascension, the prophet's miraculous journey from Mecca to Jerusalem and through the heavens, was now openly discussed, its lessons crystallizing the believer's faith. The 5 daily prayers became the anchor of Muslim life, connecting earth to the divine. Yet even as spiritual foundations solidified, worldly challenges mounted. Al-Asad's rebellion reached its peak when he besieged Sana'a, trapping the Muslim governor, Shahr ibn Bazi, in his own fortress. The situation seemed hopeless until a daring plan was hatched. Kay ibn Hubayra, one of Shahr's loyalists, infiltrated Al-Asad's inner circle. For nights, he played the devoted follower, biding his time. Then, during a private audience, he struck, driving his dagger into the false prophet's heart. The coup was swift. By dawn, Al-Asad's movement crumbled. When news reached Medina, the prophet bowed in gratitude. "Allah breaks the might of tyrants," he whispered. But his relief was short-lived. From the east came darker tidings. The Persian Empire, that ancient colossus, had murdered his envoy. In cold blood, the messenger's torn body was returned with mocking words from Emperor Khosrow. This is what awaits desert rats who dare challenge the throne of kings. The companions trembled with rage, but the prophet's response stunned them. He didn't call for immediate war. Instead, he smiled a smile that held the certainty of divine promise. The empire that tears my letters will soon be torn apart. His words carried an eerie prescience. As summer waned, the prophet made his first and only pilgrimage to Mecca under Islam's banner, the farewell pilgrimage. Over 100,000 believers joined him, a sea of white-clad worshippers stretching to the horizon. At Mount Arafat, he delivered a sermon that would echo through eternity. "Oh, people, your blood, your property, your honor are sacred to one another. No Arab is superior to a non-Arab, no white over black except by piety." The crowd wept openly. Then came the chilling question, "Have I delivered the message?" A thunderous response, "You have." He lifted his finger to the sky. "Oh Allah, bear witness." The pilgrimage concluded with a revelation that struck like lightning. "This day I have perfected for you your religion." The words left the companions breathless. After 23 years of struggle, the message was complete. Yet as the caravan returned to Medina, the prophet grew weak. Fever racked his body, though his spirit remained unbroken. He visited the graves of fallen companions at al-Baqi, whispering prayers that sounded like farewells. The Muslims tried to dismiss their growing dread. This was the messenger of Allah. Surely he would lead them for years to come. But in his final sermon at Medina's mosque, the truth became undeniable. His voice, usually so powerful, now came in labored breaths. "If I am taken from you, hold fast to the Quran." The congregation dissolved into sobs. Even Abu Bakr, the rock of the companions, broke down weeping. As the sun set on the 12th day of Rabi al-Awwal, the prophet gathered his strength for one final act. He walked supported by Ali and Fadl to Aisha's chamber, where he collapsed onto his simple mat. The fever raged hotter, but his mind remained clear. With his last ounces of strength, he did three things: freed his slaves, gave away his few possessions, and whispered, the prayer, and those your right hands possess." Then, as dawn's first light touched Medina, the greatest soul this world would ever know returned to his Lord. The man who had changed history forever left this life as he entered it, owning nothing, yet giving everything. A stunned silence gripped the city. Umar ibn al-Khattab, in denial, drew his sword and swore the prophet couldn't be dead. It took Abu Bakr's calm wisdom to steady the companions. "If you worshipped Muhammad, know that he is gone. If you worshipped Allah, he lives forever." But beneath the grief, a terrifying question loomed. Who could possibly fill the void left by the seal of the prophets? The answer would determine whether Islam's light would fade or shine brighter than ever. A stunned silence gripped Medina. The prophet was gone. The man who had carried God's final message, who had transformed Arabia with nothing but truth and perseverance, now lay wrapped in a simple shroud in Aisha's humble chamber. Outside, the companions stood paralyzed not by grief alone, but by a terrifying question. What happens now? Umar ibn al-Khattab, his face streaked with tears, refused to believe it. Sword drawn, he stormed through the streets declaring the prophet couldn't be dead, that he would return as Moses had returned to his people. The crowd murmured in confusion, some joining his desperate defiance. Then Abu Bakr stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade of clarity. "Oh people, if it was Muhammad you worshipped, know that he is gone. But if it was Allah you worshipped, know that he never dies." He recited the Quranic verse that now took on crushing finality. Muhammad is but a messenger. Other messengers have passed before him. If you were to die or be killed, would you turn back on your heels? The words struck like thunder. Umar's sword clattered to the ground. The reality they had all dreaded, but never truly prepared for was. Here, they were on their own now, but a more immediate crisis loomed. The tribal leaders began gathering in hushed circles. The Ansar of Medina convened at Saqifa Banu Sa'ida. If a leader wasn't chosen quickly, the fragile Muslim unity could shatter overnight. Abu Bakr, Umar, and Abu Ubaidah rushed to the meeting, arriving to find the Ansar already nominating their own leader. The debate grew heated until Umar made a sudden, decisive move. He grabbed Abu Bakr's hand and declared him the Prophet's rightful successor. The room erupted. Some protested, why not Ali, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law? Others argued for separate leaders for Muhajirin and Ansar, but Abu Bakr's wisdom prevailed. Unity is our strength, he said. One by one, hands extended in allegiance, first the Ansar leaders, then the rest. By nightfall, Abu Bakr stood before the community as the first caliph of Islam, but the tests came swiftly. Tribes across Arabia, held together only by loyalty to Muhammad himself, now saw an opportunity to break away. In every direction, messengers brought news of rebellion. Musaylima the liar amassed 40,000 warriors in Yamama. Tulayha claimed prophethood among the Banu Asad. The great apostasy wars had begun. Abu Bakr's response would define Islam forever. When advisors urged compromise, he gave an answer that echoed through history. By Allah, even if they refuse a single hobbling rope they used to give the Prophet, I will fight them for it. The companions stared in awe. This gentle man who had wept uncontrollably at the Prophet's death now stood with unshakable resolve. Khalid ibn al-Walid was dispatched like a lightning bolt across Arabia. At the Battle of Yamama, his 13,000 Muslims faced Musaylima's horde in a clash so brutal that 1,200 Quran memorizers fell as martyrs, prompting Abu Bakr to order the Quran's compilation into a single book. Victory came when Washi, the same man who had killed Hamza at Uhud, hurled his spear through Musaylima's heart. Meanwhile, Usama's army, originally dispatched by the Prophet before his death, marched north, proving Muslim strength remained undiminished. One by one, the rebel tribes were brought back into the fold, not through oppression, but through demonstrations of unwavering conviction. Yet Abu Bakr's greatest challenge wasn't on the battlefield, it was in the hearts of the people. When a grieving woman came weeping that her pension had been cut, he reinstated it from his own meager funds. When drought struck, he refused special food, eating the same tough bread as the poorest citizens. His leadership wasn't about power, it was about responsibility. As the rebellions were quelled, a new vision took shape. Abu Bakr looked beyond Arabia's borders to the empires that had mocked Islam's birth. He gave Khalid a new mission: march north toward Byzantium. The Muslim army, hardened by the apostasy wars, now prepared for something unimaginable just years before confronting superpowers. But as the drums of war sounded, Abu Bakr fell ill. The man who had carried the Ummah through its most fragile transition now prepared for his own. Gathering the companions, he dropped a bombshell: I appoint Umar as your next leader. The room gasped. Umar's famous temper made him a controversial choice. But Abu Bakr was firm. I have examined my heart and found this best for the Ummah. 2 weeks later, the gentle caliph who had wept while leading prayers, who had patched his own clothes and lived on dates and water, passed into eternity. His reign lasted just 2 years and 3 months, but in that blink of history, he had saved Islam from disintegration and set it on the path to eternity. As Umar ibn al-Khattab took the helm, the companions wondered, could this fiery man possibly fill Abu Bakr's shoes? The answer would come in the deserts of Syria, where a ragged Muslim force was about to shock the world. The sands of time shifted violently as Umar ibn al-Khattab grasped the reins of the caliphate. The man once known for his fiery temper now carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders. His first test came immediately. Khalid ibn al-Walid's forces were advancing deeper into Byzantine territory than any Arab army had dared before. The decisive moment arrived at the Battle of Yarmouk, where 40,000 Muslim warriors faced a Byzantine force of 150,000, the largest army Rome had assembled in centuries. The Byzantines, confident in their numbers, sent their general Vahan to negotiate. "Return to your deserts," he sneered, "and we'll grant you supplies." Khalid's response became legendary. "We didn't come for bread. We came to show you the truth of Islam. Embrace it. Pay the jizya tax in submission, or prepare for war." The negotiations collapsed. For 6 days, the armies clashed along the Yarmouk River. On the 7th day, nature itself seemed to intervene. Blinding sandstorm howled across the battlefield, turning the tide in the Muslims' favor. Khalid's brilliant cavalry maneuvers cut the Byzantine lines to pieces. By sunset, the once mighty Roman army was annihilated. The road to Jerusalem now lay open. When news reached Umar, he did something extraordinary. He left Medina on foot, with a single servant, taking turns riding their lone camel. The conqueror of empires arrived at Jerusalem's gates, dressed in patched robes, shocking the defeated Byzantines. Patriarch Sophronius, expecting a lavish conqueror, muttered, "This is indeed the sign of the end times." Umar's terms of surrender revolutionized warfare. Christians would keep their churches and pay a modest tax for Muslim protection. When the time for prayer came, he refused Sophronius' offer to pray in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, saying, "If I do, Muslims will claim it as their own." Instead, he prayed outside, where the Mosque of Umar stands to this day. But the caliph's greatest challenge wasn't conquest, it was governance. As the Islamic State exploded from desert outpost to world power, Umar instituted systems that would shape civilizations. The Diwana revolutionary welfare state, where every citizen, Muslim or not, received a stipend. The first public treasury, Bait al-Mal, with strict accounting night. Patrols where he personally checked on his people. The Islamic calendar starting from the Hijra. His justice was legendary. When his own son was caught drinking wine, a crime punishable by lashing, Umar personally administered 80 strokes until his hands bled. "The law applies to all," he declared, "or it applies to none." Yet the rapid expansion created new dangers. In Persia, the mighty Sassanid Empire finally crumbled after the Battle of Nahavand, but not without cost. The victorious general Numan ibn Muqarrin fell as a martyr, his last words urging his troops forward. When news reached the Persian emperor Yazdegerd, he fled like a hunted animal, marking the end of a 400-year-old dynasty. Back in Medina, Umar's reforms grew more audacious. He established garrison cities like Bosra and Kufa to manage the expanding territories. He standardized weights and measures across the empire. He even created the world's first minimum wage, decreeing, "No worker shall be paid so little that it doesn't meet basic needs." But shadows gathered. The conquered territories seethed with resentment. A Persian slave named Piruz Nahavandi, who had lost his family in the wars, began plotting revenge. And in Medina, Umar's uncompromising justice had made powerful enemies. The caliph seemed to sense his time was short. He assembled an electoral council to choose his successor, telling them, "If you select a leader who makes you weep while he laughs, or takes from the many to give to the few, you will have betrayed Allah and his messenger." Then, on a quiet morning in Dhul Hijjah, as Umar led prayers in Medina's mosque, Piruz struck. The Persian assassin leapt forward with a poisoned dagger, stabbing the caliph 6 times before turning the blade on himself. As Umar lay bleeding, his last act was to appoint a temporary leader, but his final words shook the companions to their core. "Tell the electoral council, my son must not be considered. One martyr is enough for the family of Khattab." Even in death, he rejected nepotism. The man who had transformed a desert faith into a world power passed as he lived, with utter humility. His only possessions were a patched robe and 17 dates. But his legacy would echo through centuries. The architect of Islamic civilization, the warrior who became history's most unlikely statesman. As the companions prepared his simple burial beside the Prophet. And Abu Bakr, a terrifying question loomed. Who could possibly follow Umar the Great? The answer would come from the most unexpected place, a quiet elder whose selection would spark Islam's first great crisis. The dagger that felled Umar ibn al-Khattab left a wound that would not heal. As the great caliph lay dying in Medina, his final breaths shaped the destiny of an empire. With remarkable clarity, he appointed a council of 6 to choose his successor, but forbade them from considering his own son. "One martyr is enough for the family of Khattab," he whispered. The message was clear. Leadership was not inheritance, but sacred trust. The electoral council deliberated in tense secrecy. Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, stood as the obvious choice, a man of unmatched knowledge and valor. But another name emerged: Uthman ibn Affan, the wealthy merchant whose generosity had funded countless expeditions. For 3 days the debate raged until Abd al-Rahman ibn Awf, the deciding vote, took an unprecedented step. He went door to door through Medina, consulting women, children, and slaves before finally declaring Uthman the new caliph. The transition was peaceful, but the challenges were immense. The Islamic Empire now stretched from Libya to Persia, a mosaic of cultures, faiths, and simmering tensions. Uthman's approach differed radically from his predecessors. Where Umar had ruled with an iron fist, Uthman governed with open hands, appointing family members to key posts and forgiving old enemies. At first, the results were spectacular. The navy he built dominated the Mediterranean, conquering Cyprus and Rhodes. His official compilation of the Quran into a single standardized text preserved the divine word for eternity. The economy flourished as never before. Silk roads buzzed with trade, and Medina's markets overflowed with goods from 3 continents. But storm clouds gathered. The old tribal jealousies Umar had suppressed now resurfaced with a vengeance. In Kufa, Basra, and Egypt, malcontents whispered that Uthman favored his Umayyad clan. The truth was more complex. Many appointments were pragmatic. His cousin Muawiyah had governed Syria brilliantly for years, but perception became reality. The breaking point came when a forged letter, allegedly from Uthman ordering a governor's execution, circulated in Egypt. Hundreds of rebels marched on Medina, surrounding the caliph's house. The 82-year-old leader, refusing to spill Muslim blood, ordered his supporters to stand down. "I will not be the first caliph to start civil war," he declared. What followed was a horror no Muslim could have imagined. The rebels broke into the caliph's home as he read the Quran. The first blow came as he recited, "Then Allah will suffice you against them," 2 to 137. His blood splattered across the holy verses. His wife Nayla threw herself over him. Her fingers were severed trying to shield him. When the assassins fled, they left Islam's third leader dead in a pool of his own blood, the first cracks appearing. In the unity of the Ummah, Ali ibn Abi Talib, thrust suddenly into the caliphate, faced an impossible dilemma: punish the killers and risk civil war, or seek reconciliation and risk injustice. His choice to prioritize unity over immediate vengeance sparked Islam's first great division. Aisha, the Prophet's widow, along with Talha and Zubair, marched to Basra demanding justice, leading to the Battle of the Camel, where Muslims first drew swords against Muslims. Ali's victory only deepened the rift. Then came Muawiyah, Uthman's cousin and Syria's governor, who displayed the murdered caliph's bloody shirt in Damascus's mosque, rallying cry for vengeance. At Siffin, 2 massive Muslim armies faced each other. Just as Ali's forces gained advantage, Muawiyah's men raised Qurans on spears, a call to arbitration that split Ali's camp. The Kharijites, radical purists who rejected all compromise, turned against both sides, marking the birth of Islam's first extremist sect. In the end, Ali fell not on a foreign battlefield, but to a Kharijite assassin's poisoned sword in Kufa's mosque, the fourth caliph martyred like his predecessor. His last words to his sons Hasan and Hussein were simple: never seek vengeance for me. As the dust settled, Muawiyah emerged as caliph, establishing the Umayyad dynasty and moving the capital to Damascus. The era of the rightly guided caliphs had ended, but their legacy would shape Islamic civilization forever, from Abu Bakr's desperate struggle to preserve unity, to Umar's revolutionary justice, to Uthman's tragic martyrdom, to Ali's principled stand. These 30 years contained lifetimes of lessons. The companions who had stood with the Prophet now passed into history, but the light they carried would endure. The Quran's promise had been fulfilled. You were the best nation brought forth for mankind, 3-110. Through their triumphs and tragedies, Umar's terms of surrender revolutionized warfare. Christians would keep their churches and pay a modest tax for Muslim protection. When the time for prayer came, he refused Sophronius' offer to pray in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, saying, "If I do, Muslims will claim it as their own." Instead, he prayed outside, where the Mosque of Umar stands to this day. But the caliph's greatest challenge wasn't conquest, it was governance. As the Islamic State exploded from desert outpost to world power, Umar instituted systems that would shape civilizations. The Diwana revolutionary welfare state, where every citizen, Muslim or not, received a stipend. The first public treasury, Bait al-Mal, with strict accounting night. Patrols where he personally checked on his people. The Islamic calendar starting from the Hijra. His justice was legendary. When his own son was caught drinking wine, a crime punishable by lashing, Umar personally administered 80 strokes until his hands bled. The law applies to all, he declared, or it applies to none. Yet the rapid expansion created new dangers. In Persia, the mighty Sassanid Empire finally crumbled after the Battle of Nahavan, but not without cost. The victorious general Numan ibn Muqarrin fell as a martyr, his last words urging his troops forward. When news reached the Persian emperor Yazdegerd, he fled like a hunted animal, marking the end of a 400-year-old dynasty. Back in Medina, Umar's reforms grew more audacious. He established garrison cities like Bosra and Kufa to manage the expanding territories. He standardized weights and measures across the empire. He even created the world's first minimum wage, decreeing, "No worker shall be paid so little that it doesn't meet basic needs." But shadows gathered. The conquered territories seethed with resentment. A Persian slave named The answers are hidden in these 10 episodes. Revisit them. Study them. Let them reshape how you see power, faith, and your own potential. Because the men who changed history were no demigods. They were flesh and blood, just like you. The only difference? They dared to act when the world said it was impossible. Now, the choice is yours. Will you let this story fade, or will you make it part of your mind's arsenal? Smash that like button if you believe these lessons deserve to go viral. Subscribe now, because this channel is your gateway to the untold strategies that still rule our world. And most importantly, share this with one person who needs to hear the truth about power, sacrifice, and legacy. The desert sands have spoken. The question is, will you listen?